Today we'll be discussing my review of Call of Duty Black Ops 6. I doubt the game really needs an introduction. Most people have played a Call of Duty game. If you haven't, you've probably seen it by now. This game doesn't really change anything too crazy in many of its areas, such as multiplayer and zombies, but I would argue at the very least, overall, it is a very fun and cohesive experience throughout its three main game modes, despite some issues I have with some storytelling and some very bad monetization practices. We're going to go over the game through its campaign, zombies, and multiplayer individually. Before we do go over those areas, I do want to mention a few things, more so on the technical side. The game does look great. The game has very good audio design, very good voice acting, direction, everything in that area. I didn't really want to mention this too much in the other areas because it's not like a AAA like Red Dead Redemption type story. You're not really here for the audio design. You're not really here for all that stuff. And it also doesn't really change too much. Just like Modern Warfare 2019, it looks very similar. It sounds very similar, but it's good. And I do want to get that out of the way and give it its props there. For the last few years now, the Call of Duty campaigns have pretty much been running on fumes. They haven't really changed too much. They haven't innovated in any way. They've either been oscillating between your very standard linear FPS campaign that presents really no new ideas but is well polished and presented, or the same thing but is not as good, aka Call of Duty Vanguard. Black Ops 6 at least tries to remedy this by presenting a few new ideas and change up the structure of how the campaign works. The story is structured more like your standard Call of Duty, though. It's a simple mission-based structure where you go one level by one level, no major side missions, nothing of that sort, and you just work from one linear endpoint to the end in most occasions. Where the changes are most apparent, though, are in the gameplay, both within the level structure itself as well as the varying gameplay ideas that take place in the different missions, both in its tone and how you actually play it. One of the earlier missions demonstrates the difference in gameplay philosophy versus the last few games pretty well. You had a political convention trying to find information from one particular individual that can lead you to a certain restricted area that finds you more information about other individuals. Pretty standard Black Ops stuff, but what makes this different than the past games is that you have multiple routes of how to obtain information about this individual. You can go through his wife, you can go through items he had brought with him, you can go through people in the political realm associated with him. There's lots of ways they allow you to find this information you need to go find this individual. Now, if you're one of the unlucky few to play the Modern Warfare 3 campaign, you may recall those open-ended missions where they drop you in a Warzone map. They gave you a few objectives, a line or two, and then just you had to do it. It was boring, kind of sucked. No one really liked it. Well, Black Ops 6 tries something a little bit different. It essentially takes that idea of placing you in a big map, but instead it creates it on its own. It's not just a Warzone map. It has its own unique areas, own unique terrain, design, all that jazz. But also gives you unique objectives, and it gives you, one, options on how many objectives you want to do. Two, it varies the objectives. And three, it also actually plays into the overall story in a more cohesive way. You see the gameplay of different genres and philosophies as well. For example, there's two missions which play more into a horror vibe. One of them very much gave me a Resident Evil vibe, which I really appreciated. That was a really fun one. You got a flashlight, you got a pistol, good luck. That's all it really gave you. Great time. Another one is where you're going around the map doing your standard stealth objectives, not too different from other Call of Duty games. But what makes this one cool is that it's actually focused more on dialogue and just sightseeing to find information to accomplish your objective rather than just stealthing around and not get caught. And it doesn't sound too different, but when you add all this together, it does create a much more varied experience, and it makes it much more memorable than a lot of the recent Call of Duties really have been, to be honest. Now, with that said, it does kind of run into a little bit of identity crisis when you think back on a campaign. What I mean by that is that the game brings together a lot of different ideas, many of which are good, like I said, and I did appreciate, but it only goes into like a kiddie pool depth of them, right? You get the Resident Evil type ideas, but you're only going to get a little bit of the horror elements. You're not going to get anything too deeply baked into it. You get your open world map, but you only get one map, and it's pretty one note. So you get a lot of these different ideas which are good on paper and are good for a one-time playthrough, but definitely leave you wishing, oh, I wish they could have gone a bit more in that. But it does kind of feel like they stretch themselves thin, and they really wanted to appeal to the widest demographic of all this stuff while also being creative. So while it is nice, it also does present that drawback of you do feel like they were handicapped just a little bit. One other thing Black Ops 6 does differently than its predecessors is it actually brings up a different form of progression. In the campaign, you have a hub area which has various secrets you can unlock, various things you can find, both for lore, just the general area, but also just for upgrades for yourself and for multiplayer. The other thing is that you can spend currency in the campaign, just general cash you find in missions, to upgrade various parts by your character. You can get better, let's say, health, for example, better aim down sight speed. Nothing too game breaking, nothing too crazy, but it's nice to have this general sense of, hey, I can unlock this after I do this mission because I found this item in the campaign. Just something little like that, along with the other gameplay ideas I mentioned, does make it a generally more engaging playthrough than the last few have been, and it opens the campaign up a bit more from just a run shoot stealth shoot type of mission structure that the story has pretty much been doing for 16 years now. The story itself is pretty interesting for the most part. It has your standard Black Ops twists and turns, mindfuckery. You get, hallucinations, stuff that tries to make you think, oh, is this real? Is this actually happening? That keeps the story engaging, much like all the other Black Ops games. Some of the twists and turns could be better. The villain, for example, I think they're really cool, but it was very obvious it was coming. But I do think it was all in all done pretty well. The twists were satisfying. I thought most of the characters were, at least on the surface, interesting. Much better than what we got in the last few years for the most part. I actually thought the villain in particular was really good, though. I really liked how they delved into their backstory and their issues they had in their past and why they did what they did. And this level of characterization you get for the villain is nothing you've really seen in Call of Duty in a long time. Most of the time, it's just generic bad guy, generic nation. Well, we actually get an individual with a well-developed backstory for once. It only took them 10 years, but we finally got it recently. The main gripe I have with the story, though, is the ending is, quite honestly, dog shit. It doesn't explain anything, which isn't necessarily bad, but it leaves so many open-ended threads for literally no reason. There's a certain character, I won't spoil, that I want to know what happens to. It seems like it'd be very important to most people playing, and it feels like they just forgot to tie up any loose ends. You can say they're leaving it up to interpretation, but it's not satisfying in the way they do it. The other issue I have with the campaign is that a few of the characterizations and backstories are also very underdeveloped, which isn't new for Call of Duty. I gave praise for how they did the villain, but your main character, for example, has this really intriguing element in their backstory, which you explore through a mission very deeply, and then they just don't bring it up ever again except for one other line, and then it's like, oh, okay. I mean, you compare it to Perseus and all that stuff in Black Ops Cold War, where you really got to see why your character was the way they were and what the big twist was. It was satisfying. You're like, oh, that's so cool. And Black Ops 6 is just like, oh, well, fuck you if you want to know. It's really unsatisfying. I mean, as a whole, the story was good. I enjoyed it. But I do think that it does have the classic Call of Duty issues of underdeveloped ending and some issues with how it tells its story. Very much like it had a time limit or a word limit, an essay count they had that they couldn't go over, so they couldn't actually explain this well enough. Now, the zombies part of this review is going to be really short, to be honest. I mean, I like zombies. It's cool. I just don't really get too deeply into it. The last time I really loved zombies was World of War. I grinded that shit for hours a day. I remember waking up to play Diaries at 6 in the morning. The good times. But I never really got too deep into zombies like I did the campaign or multiplayer. The game launched with 2 maps, but at the time of writing this review, it's actually at 3 during Season 1 Reloaded. I will say, at least from my perspective as a casual player who likes to run around the map, upgrade, see how long they can survive, they all seem pretty cool. I really liked Terminus. It was very unique. I liked how you can control the boat and run around. Liberty Falls is cool. I enjoy always the suburban outdoor vibes, the town vibes, and seeing everything destroyed. And there's some cool traps in there, even though nothing's too crazy. I really like the snow version they did as well. The newest map they have is the one in the castle. Only played it a few times, but again, I mean, it all seems fine. Again, I'm not a major zombies guy, but I feel like if you're a zombies fan, at the very least, the level design seems pretty consistent, and everything seems to play in very well. There doesn't seem to be any glaring flaws of any sort. The one thing I will note is that Zombies this year does have a bit more progression in it, not just through your weapon levels and stuff, which shares between multiplayer just like Cold War. You have these augments you can research, and what those are is your perks, your weapon mods, all that jazz. you can get actually slight upgrades just through XP on each of these items, and it's actually pretty engaging. I like how you have this kind of little hamster wheel in the background that you can always keep running. It doesn't have any pay-to-win characteristics in this one as far as I'm aware, and they aren't major or game-breaking for the most part, but they're just a fun little addition that gives you a little bit more depth without overcomplicating it, and that's something I can definitely appreciate. The Gobblegum system also returns, which if you don't know is a single-use consumable upgrade which gives you generally various benefits, some which is like just max ammo, some gives you a guaranteed ultra-powerful weapon. They can vary and depends on rarity. You get them through just general XP and just general playing through rounds. I'm going to keep this part a bit shorter because I do want to tie this into something else in multiplayer, but you can buy them for real life money, and that's going to become important later when I talk about some of the stuff going on with the multiplayer as well, but just keep that in mind. Now, the multiplayer is where I would say the real meat of the game is for me. I've always enjoyed the multiplayer of the Call of Duty franchise more than every other mode for the most part, barring a few small exceptions, and it's where I spend the vast majority of my time. For example, in the campaign with all the upgrades and gathering some footage and stuff like that, I spent 9 hours, 8 hours at most. Zombies so far I spent about 10 to 15, or multiplayer I spent a little bit over 50. So as you can see, it's by far a majority of my time, and I'm happy to report that it's also by far the best part of the game, at least to me personally. It follows a standard formula like the rest of your Call of Duty multiplayers. You got your creative class, you got your perks, you got your field upgrades, stuff that's been around for either since Call of Duty 4 in 2007 or since, Modern Warfare 2019 or various games in between then. Nothing about that fundamental design has changed much. The maps are pretty similar. It's all 6v6 or 2v2 for gunfight. What has changed in this game is a few separate things. One is the movement system. There is now what's called Omni movement, where you can basically move any direction you want. So you can dive backwards, you can dive sideways, you can sprint backwards, sprint forwards. It's nothing that changes your moment-to-moment gameplay on a crazy basis like the jetpacks did, what we saw with Advanced Warfare and Black Ops 3, but it does add a higher skill ceiling, especially in the faster-paced games that you tend to encounter with these smaller maps. It kind of adds into what I feel is overall success of the multiplayer, and that it hits the right notes for me, being a very fast, arcadey, sometimes annoying or, unbalanced, but overall very gamey-like experience. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't focus on realism. It doesn't focus on anything that could detract from the fun in terms of its gameplay design. It's fast, it's crazy. They have a 10v10 mode. They have 6v6 on 2v2 maps. There's explosive everywhere. There's some stuff that may be a little bit too unbalanced, but they focused on what would be more fun rather than realistic or just for the competitive scene. What I feel like Call of Duty has struggled with sometimes, and I'm looking at you, 2019 Modern Warfare, is they focus on game design that either is not fun for the player, but maybe makes the developers feel like they're doing something different, or they're focusing on keeping it so balanced and realistic that they forget why Call of Duty became such a good time in the first place. It was never Battlefield. It was never Tarkov. It was never any of those things. It was its own unique gameplay style of a fast-paced, arcadey shooter with deep progression, and Black Ops 6 successfully managed to return to that idea. The maps feed into this too. Most of them are smaller or have a lot of close quarter encounters. Now, one of the criticisms I have heard a lot, and I would say I agree with, is that the map designs are lacking, and that's fair. I think there's quite a few maps which could be better. There's not many in here that I would say are 10 out of 10 highlights. I do like Skyline a lot. I also like Payback. I think Skyline is actually probably the one I would say would be a classic from this game so far. But overall, I don't hate them as much as most people, and I think as I played the game more and tried different combinations, and once you get into, more of a flow in it, I've actually enjoyed most of the maps. I don't hate many of them. There's nothing, it's not like 2019 Modern Warfare, or let's say the Advanced Warfare, where you have some maps that you're just who the hell designed this? This isn't fun. And I think most of them encourage a faster paced play style, even if some of them could be designed a bit better. They fit into a more, just enjoyable game flow than what we've seen in games like Modern Warfare 2, for example. There's also a decent variety in the multiplayer. There's quite a few guns at launch. There could be a bit more in terms of the secondary and melee, at least when there was at launch, but there's quite a few guns. There's a good variety of perks in every category, and they've added some more. A ton of field upgrades. They got pretty much everything. Feels like it has an appropriate amount of items, at least for the launch. Since the launch, and we're in Season 1 Reloaded as of right now, They've added, I think, 4 new weapons, a new melee weapon, 2 new perks, 1 or 2. I know one's for Warzone. They added a special weapon, and they've added a few other small things here and there. We've also had 2 new maps, a remake, a new 2v2 map. So the support has definitely also been much higher than what we've seen in most of the Call of Duties. Modern Warfare 3 also had similar support, but it was also Modern Warfare 3, so most people ignored it for good reason. I think what I really appreciate about this level of support and some of the content is that as somebody who's really liked the 6v6 multiplayer the most in the series, I felt that since Modern Warfare 2019, it's felt more of Call of Duty is Warzone first, the actual $70 game you're paying money for second. Modern Warfare 3 kind of was turning that around with their multiplayer support. Now, part of that was because they had a 2-minute campaign and another dogshit zombies mode and special ops mode for Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3, so they kind of had to support the multiplayer some. But this game not only has a decently beefy campaign and a good amount of zombies content at launch, it has a very built-out multiplayer, which they're supporting at a very high rate. And I definitely think that's something to appreciate because it feels like Activision has focused more so on Warzone and Warzone only for a few years. And it's only been recently that us multiplayer lovers have actually been getting content for the $70 game we paid for. The other big win for the multiplayer, in my opinion, is the return of the classic prestige system. For you, those of you who don't know, and I know it hasn't been around for a few years, classic prestige is where you level up the civic level, in this case 55, in most games it was between 50 and 60. Once you hit that level and get a certain amount of XP over, you can restart from level 1 on a new prestige. Most of your items are gone, your progression stays, and you level up again, essentially creating a very addicting hamster wheel of a progression system where you can keep leveling up. You can also see in the lobby everyone else's progress, and it was very satisfying. There was no time gating, there was no seasonal levels, there was no waiting for a season to start so you can level up past 55, none of that BS. It was good old-fashioned prestige, and that's something that I think taking out a model for 2018 was one of the biggest mistakes they made. It got rid of one of the most fun parts of progressing, of unlocking items for your class over and over again, unlocking new unique emblems and other stuff, and replaced it with a seasonal time-gated hamster grind that was both too much and too little at the same time. This game smartly brings that back while keeping stuff like the Battle Pass and other things you can progress through as well. It is also crossed over into zombies, mind you, so you can level between zombies, multiplayer, all that ties in together just like it did in Cold War, but now this time to Classic Prestige. They even added extra incentives per Prestige. For example, you can unlock unique weapon models, character skins, charms, emblems, calling cards, loading screens, so many things. Some of them are really cool, some of them kind of dog shit, but the idea is that the fact you're actually getting something. And to me, I like this evolution of Prestige of having unlocks per Prestige level within each prestige. And to me, it hopefully signals this is the way they're going to go forward, because I personally, and maybe you guys in the comments might disagree, I don't know a single person who liked the old seasonal prestige thing we got from 2019 up until Modern Warfare 3. Not a single person I know preferred it. This way, in my opinion, is a better way to please everybody with the cross progression between modes and bringing back the more addictive prestige grind. The multiplayer also feels decently well polished. I say decently because I've seen some other people encounter more glitches than I have. I don't really have too much to report on this topic, but I mainly bring it up just because a few of the other Call of Duties have been very bad with their polish. Black Ops Cold War, when it came out, I had it on Xbox Series X, just ran like, it was horrible. It ran at like negative 10 frames sometimes. It would crash all the time. I'll have to download different versions of it. Vanguard, I'm surprised that game even functioned. And then Modern Warfare 2 and 3, I guess, relatively ran. So Cold War, at the very least, does the bare minimum. Now, that is what all these games should be doing, but I do want to mention that it also doesn't feel as broken, even though it does have some glitches, and I know some people have had some server issues. Unfortunately, where Black Ops 6 does have a major issue, both in its multiplayer and its zombies, and also Warzone by extension, is the deep, predatory, and sometimes scummy monetization model that Activision has gone with for many parts of the game. I mentioned the Gobblegums earlier, and that's going to be playing into this as well. So in Zombies mode, when you have the Gobblegums, you can unlock them just by playing and doing rounds, like I said, but you can also buy them, as I mentioned. And this gets into the facet of the game where you realize everything is monetized. In multiplayer, I mentioned it has all this content, and it's true, it does. but it has a store page which has just a crazy amount of bundles, skins, characters, loading screens. They now have skins for your grenades. Like, I don't know who the fuck is looking at their grenade skins, but they have them. They have kill streak skins. Again, I don't know who's looking at that, but they have them. They have all these different sprays, charms, all this junk. Some of it's really cool, I admit. The anime one gets me every time. But so much of it is so heavily monetized that it does sometimes leave a sour taste in your mouth. You know, you're paying $70 for a game. You get all this cool, some of the really cool art design and crazy stuff they add. And it's like, oh, I want this skin and character. And it's like $30 real life dollars. That's just fucking crazy. And add insult to injury, this is one of the games where when you buy COD points, you can only buy them in certain increments, like $5, $11. I forget the exact amounts, but if you have $10 of COD points and the pack you want to buy is 13, well, now you can't just buy $3 of COD points. You got to buy $5. So it's very scummy in that aspect. I also don't like how the battle passes expire every season. I know that's not unusual, but I think Halo Infinite had the right idea where battle passes stay active forever. I believe Marvel Rivals now is doing the same. There's been a few games that do it. And I bring up the Gobblegums again because that's another thing. It's a nice gameplay system, but it turns from being a risk-reward system of using something valuable on maybe a bad run of zombies to, oh, this feels like there's always in cities thought of, are they just trying to get me to buy these good Gobblegums again instead of trying to be careful with them? And I think it's just overall something that every Call of Duty game and every AAA game has. I'm not saying this is Black Ops specific, but it is just disappointing because this game, in my opinion, as you can tell, I really do enjoy it quite a bit. I played it a ton. I think it's really good. But it is emblematic of the issues AAA gaming has with its monetization systems. And if this is something that's turned you off games before from the AAA space or Call of Duty or whatever, unfortunately, the good gameplay mechanics and ideas Black Ops 6 presents do not override those just because the game's good. Those still exist, and all the support in the world for the multiplayer and zombies won't overrule the fact that the game still is pushing stuff for you at every turn. I mean, for God's sakes, I have the Battle Pass because I do enjoy unlocking this stuff, but then it still tries to push me to Black Cell, which is like 20 extra bucks every time I open it up. And this type of monetization, in my opinion, I wouldn't blame you if it's too far for you not to play the game because of it. Despite those gripes I have to monetization, and as you can tell, it's something that I do think does bring, just not really just the game, but the industry down as a whole, Black Ops 6 still does remain, in my opinion, one of the better Call of Duties in the last few years. I love the multiplayer, just the overall moment-to-moment gameplay. I think it's very addicting. They brought the progression back to where it needs to be, and they have a lot of content. The campaign was overall a very fun and memorable story, even if it does have some lingering design issues and a very bad ending. And the zombies, for a more casual player like me, it's fun. Probably won't play it a ton, but it's a good time. There's nothing that's going to blow you away about this game, in my opinion, if you've fallen off the Call of Duty train. But if you're still a fan of Call of Duty, you enjoy it casually, I think you'll get more enjoyment out of this than you have a lot of the other ones very recently. I can only hope Activision will take some of the positive impacts from this game and its design philosophy into the future Call of Duties. The series is kind of like a line graph that just goes up and down depending on the year. Right now, I think we're a bit more on the upside. It's like last year, we're on the downside. We'll see what happens in the future. I personally have more enjoyed Treyarch games in the last few years than the Infinity Ward ones and the Sledgehammer ones, but we'll see. I do think overall, if you are a fan of Call of Duty, though, I would recommend getting this, at least on a sale, even with some of the issues I mentioned. If you've played the game, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. And thank you for watching. Have a good day.